Yeah, yeah.
Shall we
So
do some questions?
hopefully some. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So, well, I should ask, what was your first contact with Gil's music and what sort of captured you, obviously, on that first listening?
Yeah, so that was sort of a roundabout thing. I guess I was into Miles and I was into small group stuff first. Sort of discovered Miles backwards, right? Like fusion stuff first, and working back and understanding some of that music, and then eventually, really getting into kind of blue milestones around about midnight. And then I was always into Herbie. So then when I started, I had a good teacher at University of Miami, that Ron Miller,
Mm.
that taught about modal music and Herbie and Wayne and stuff, and he had really good insights into that. And so then as I got into that music, I guess that's when I also started listening to the Miles and Gill things. I was aware of them for a long time, and I guess I heard one guy try to write in that style his own pieces, and I thought they sounded kind of cool. And that also, I guess, made me curious to listen more. And so then as I started, listening to that more intently, oh man, the sound combinations are really something, And, it's weird because I tell people, I think that there are things you realize later, I think, about why you listened to certain things, And growing up in the time that I did in the 70s, there was a lot of electric keyboard stuff, and pianos were kind of, they were around, but playing fusiony type stuff, I was always playing electric keyboards, and I didn't really develop like a sound or a touch on the piano for a longer time. I studied classical stuff, but I still don't think I understood about how to get a tone out of the instrument, And I would read these things where Miles would talk about getting his sound, and I didn't really understand what he was talking about. And and then as I got more into piano playing, and I had teachers that were like, you got to get this kind of sound. Listen to this guy. Listen to that guy. Listen to what he gets. Um, I started getting more and more into sound in the way of listening to Gil's things. This would have been, say in the mid 1980s or so, and it's funny because I was interested in Gil's music, I was interested in Duke's sounds, and I was interested in Claire Fisher's uh, sounds also. And then the strange thing was I was really into the horn charts, not so much the tunes themselves, but the horn and string writing on the Prince records that were popular at that time.
Mm.
Always had an affinity for funk music, and so when I listened to those Prince things, I always thought, man, the string and horn writing is really good on this. And I would try to figure these things out, transcribe these different things, bits and pieces of them, in two measures, four measures, whatever little passage, that kind of thing, right? And and the strange thing was, I met Claire Fisher later, and I had occasion to talk with him a few times, and then I realized that he was the guy who had written the string and chord charts for the Prince records, but I didn't know that, right? And so it was like I liked Claire Fisher's music and I liked the Prince stuff, and I was like, oh, maybe like in my subconscious, I realized that there were similar approaches. They all used counterpoint, they all used interesting instrumental combinations, contrary motion, all these things that were rooted in more sophisticated classical things, right? And even whether they drew them from that is another story, but parallels to that, right?
Mm.
And so then I realized, I used to think, oh, gee, I listen to all these different kinds of music. I'm very eclectic and all this. And then I thought, I don't know, man, maybe I'm not so eclectic after all. Maybe I actually gravitate toward these things that have this kind of tone color and texture. And so that's when I started going even deeper into Gil's stuff. And I think the other thing probably for me was like I don't know if people appreciate this kind of thing or not nowadays, but when I was younger, jazz was kind of competitive. You had to be a good player. People didn't mind telling you if they were better than you or if you needed to get something together. And you were, I guess, proud if you got paying gigs playing jazz and stuff like that, right? And so to me, even when I would read those things with Miles, where he'd say, "Well, once people figure out Gil's music, they'll learn all this." I guess I sort of took that as a challenge. I mean, even though he obviously wasn't talking to me, but he was just talking to musicians, right? And I felt like, well, damn it, somebody should do this, and somebody should try to get after this and take this challenge up. Because if you did know Miles, that's probably what you would have had to do in a way. You would have had to meet whatever challenge he laid down, right? So I felt like, well, I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to try to start picking away at this music and see what's going on with it.
Great.
So anyway, as later on, I was able to see some of his stuff, and it came about in a weird way. I live in Massachusetts, which is about a 3-hour drive to New York City from where I am. I'm south of Boston by about a half, 3/4 of an hour. I decided in the early '90s to do my doctoral work, and at that time, New York University was one of only a couple places that had a doctorate in jazz studies. So I thought, well, I'll go there, and I'll commute down there one day a week, and I'll study. And they had Jim McNeely on faculty, so I got to study with Jim McNeely. And so that was really cool. And going to New York one day a week was really cool. I liked doing that. I had a friend who was teaching at a college down there, so we'd get together now and then, or I'd play on one of his recitals or something. And so in the course of doing that, there was a music house down there called King Brand that used to publish music papers, different score papers, and very specialized score paper, right? This is I was just getting into music notation on the computer at this time, but I was still doing most of my writing by hand.
Mm.
And they had like 20 staff score paper, and they had also published David Berger's Ellington transcriptions. So I had bought a couple of those, studied them, and I thought, well, I'm down there, I'll stop and get some music paper. So I went in there one day, and the guy that owned the place said, I asked for a pad of 20 staff paper. He says, "What are you using it for?" And I said, "Well, I'm transcribing these Gil Evans things." He goes, "Oh, I'm working on the remastering of that stuff with Sony."
Mm.
And Sony was, so he says, "You might be interested to hear some of these tapes I have." So he had tapes of the rough mixes of what became the box set, the Miles and Gil box set, right? And so he said, "Well, I'm in touch with Anita Evans, and she's got some scraps of stuff that Gil wrote. Maybe I can get you if you tell me what tunes you're looking at. I'll see what I can get." And then he hired me to do a couple transcriptions for Chicago Jazz Orchestra, Smithsonian, and all this stuff. And so that's another way that I got deeper into it. Eventually, through him, met Anita Evans. She let me have some of the copies that you see in the book, like "Best You Is My Woman" and "My Ship" and "Will o' the Wisp" and stuff, And she told me that, according to her, she said that Gil was kind of bitter later on in life about the fact that these things hadn't made him much money, and that he started destroying the scores that he had.
Oh.
And she told me that Herbie Hancock used to come over and beg her to pick through the trash to get these scores, and she was kind of like, "Well, Gil doesn't want them out," and it was kind of crazy story, But she had scraps of things, but not many scores at all. So, but even those scraps, between that and the video, you could start kind of doing some detective work and seeing how he thought about instrument combinations and stuff, So I hope that's a decent explanation of how I got into it,
Definitely. That's a great story. And isn't it one of those nice coincidences in life, both with your Claire Fisher arrangements, but also just meeting someone
Yeah, yeah.
when you're buying some staff paper?
Right, right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was kind of crazy when I think about it. Yeah, I was lucky, so
yeah.
yeah.
All right, question two. We're going to get into a little bit more technical stuff.
Okay.
So this has got to do with how Gil thinks about counterpoint,
Hmm.
and the way he seems to harmonize a passage is really interesting to me, and I really like studying that. And I notice the way he treats the bass line or the horn that's on the bass part
Yeah,
seems to be so different to how other people approached harmonizations, especially in his time.
yeah,
So I like to think of his music as a melody, a counterpoint bass line, which I
right.
like to think of as like if I think of it in a classical sense, like a first species, like same rhythm,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then with three inner parts.
yeah, yeah.
So how do you think Gil may have come up with that sort of idea, or is he really the only person who was doing that?
Well, it seems like well, I guess the reason I'm hesitating is I'm thinking there's really a couple answers, right? So I mean, I
Mm,
think some of even though his writing sounds very different and is from a counterpoint aspect quite distinctive, there's still some basic four-part big band stuff in there, right? And the idea that you'd harmonize down from a melody and like a four-part chord. And I don't know how they teach it in your country, but I know the way we were taught was like everything is a function or a substitution of root 7 5 3. So if you have a C7 chord with a C melody note, then the most basic harmonization is C, B flat, G, E, right? And if there's an E melody note, then it's 3 root 7 5. You can sub nines for roots, you can sub flat nines for roots, you can sub, flat 13 for five, you can sub 6 for 7 on a major chord, all these things, right? Kind of, I guess, what I think of as conventional big band writing. You can do that four-part voicing, you can double the lead, you can do drop two and double the lead, right? All these things. So I think there's still a fair amount of that in there. And then, but to your point, to your question about the bass line, I guess I would say it seems like, uh, what's different is that he liked that independence of voices that both you and I sort of perceive in that music. It sounds kind of cool when the voices are operating more independently and not just in the block movement. And by, I guess in those days, you were still probably looking at bass players that could only amplify very minimally. And so fattening that bass line with tuba or bass clarinet was a way to get a fatter presence in that bass line. And the other thing, of course, right, which you've probably noticed, is the bass player, usually Paul Chambers, right, is still playing like a walking type of line, but the bass clarinet or the tuba or the bass bone or some combination of those are playing like a rhythmicized version of that line that swings more, right?
mm,
And you'd think that it would clash rhythmically, but it somehow doesn't, right?
mm,
And so I don't know. That seems to be a thing that's unique to him. The idea that I think fattening the bass line. You get some guys that used to do that with bass bone or used to do that with Barry sax, right? But I think probably like in those cases, the Barry player is really honking or the bass bone player is really playing fortissimo, right? And so with Gil, it was a more delicate thing with the tuba or the bass clarinet. And plus, it took the rhythmic aspect of a melodic line where the string bass player was playing a straight four version of that line, right? So that to me, I think I don't know what made him think of that, but that seems to be the really unique thing I think there.
Yeah. All right, let's do another one. That was a good start. Um, so doublings. Obviously, we could talk about orchestration for hours, really, but just
Yeah,
to try and bring this down to a shorter conversation about the way Gil doubles the melody and often doubles it down the octave.
yeah.
Again, it seems like something that's unique to Gil. Is is that correct that it's mostly a Gil technique that's probably been picked up now more so?
Yeah, I guess I always thought like, I was just doing one of the things I've been doing during COVID is updating charts that I have, and I had done an arrangement for this. It was a three-horn group, but it had a guitarist, and so I'd done an arrangement of Cottontail for it, and I took the sax soli and I orchestrated it for the three horns and guitar, kind of buried the guitar in the stack, so you get the four-part harmony, right? But the original sax soli for Cottontail had doubled lead, where the bary's double and the alto down an octave, right?
Mm.
And so I think that method of, I mean, maybe you already know this, and maybe I'm misunderstanding your question, but I think that method of doubling the lead voice an octave lower was pretty well established in the big band era, especially in sax sections, five piece sax sections. I think what probably Gil did differently was the instrument combinations, right? That he wasn't doing that uniform kind of five saxes. It was a French horn doubling the melody, or it was alto sax or bass clarinet or something that you wouldn't expect to be there on that doubled line. Or maybe if it was a soft thing, it was a couple of instruments playing softly that were doubling that melody down an octave. So I don't think the idea of doubling the melody would have been Gil's thing, but I think doing it, like paying attention to those sound color combinations and getting just the right double, to me would be something that would be unique to Gil.
Yes, true. And I should have really said that better in my question, but of course, because the old style big band would have been that the trombones are sort of doubling trumpets down an octave
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
But so I guess it's really the doubling of an octave, and it always seems to be a different instrument for me.
yeah,
So if trumpet's on top, you got someone else on the octave down. So if you think of Birth of the Cool, Publicity, it'd be the baritone on the
right,
octave.
right.
And for me, that sort of makes sense in terms of making it a richer sound because you're going to get a different array of harmonics as well, aren't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
good point.
so. That's another thing, right? So Duke did that in his own way. What people have come to call voicing across sections, really because that in the time that Duke did it, almost every big band writer would just do block sections, right? And so this idea of having you know trumpet, clarinet, and trombone, and one of them's muted and one's not. You got three distinct tone colors playing this line in three-part harmony, or playing like in Mood Indigo, playing counterpoint or something to each other. Contrary motion, right? So I think of Gil as being part of that tradition, but or not tradition, but thinking along similar lines, except not the plunger mute thing, like a whole different context of tone color, right? Like a much more orchestral mindset in terms of tone color, you know, where
Yeah.
Duke, the plunger mute thing, was always a factor in those combinations, or almost always was, you know.
Yeah. Oh, great. This is awesome. I'm loving this. Thank you.
I'm glad I could be of some help, or some interest.
Awesome. Um, right, next question. So some of Gil's charts, especially the ones for Claude Thornhill, they have this I've written here good cheese. Like there's this extremely nostalgic quality to them, even though that it is older music.
Yeah,
And on the surface, they're very slightly cheesy or sweet sounding.
Yeah, yeah.
But of course, somehow there's still an interest in the music. Yeah, I think of a chart like Happy Stranger. I don't know if you know that one.
No, I don't know that one.
Um, but do you know that quality I mean in the Claude Thornhill music?
Sure, sure, yeah, yeah. I mean, I know, I know the. I guess I'm more familiar with like Snowfall or Donna Lee or those kinds of things. But I've listened to it. I mean, I got a couple CDs of stuff, and over the years, it's been a while, but I've probably listened to a dozen or more tunes by him, and more than once, right? So yeah, that romantic quality or that nostalgic quality, right? That seems to be, I don't know. I talk a lot with students about that type of thing. I think the way that, again, I don't know, your country and how people's attitudes are. I mean, in America, I think the time we live in now is much more cynical and jaded, and romance is kind of like out the window. And I think, uh, Miles was a volatile guy, but he was a romantic too. And I don't know if you've ever seen the British trumpeter Ian Carr has a bio on Miles, a biography of Miles, right?
Yeah, I think I've read it once
And,
upon a time.
yeah, and in the back of that, there's an index of songs that Frank Sinatra recorded and that Miles recorded, right? And when you look up the recording dates, they're all like 6, 9 months apart. When Sinatra recorded some tune, Miles did some version of it. And and I think, when I was a kid, right? So Sinatra was old at that point, and he was passe, and there were older people that still loved him, but to me, he was a lounge lizard, and not. So I had very little use for that music. I recall hearing it on the radio when I was very young, but I have a sister who's 7 years younger than me, and she has no recollection of hearing that on the radio. It was kind of out by that point. And so when I first read that Miles, who I thought was the hippest guy on the planet, was into Sinatra, I thought there's no way that someone that cool would be into a lounge lizard. And of course, I had heard only the Sinatra hits of the 60s and 70s on the radio, and I thought they were kind of overdone and his voice wasn't great. And so when I finally went back and listened to the Sinatra things with Nelson Riddle, I'm like, oh man, these are beautiful arrangements, right? And
Yeah, they are.
and this is what Miles was hearing, right? And in a way, Sinatra and Miles had similar personalities in that they could be very difficult and combative on the outside, but inside they were romantics. They loved women and they loved having relationships, and however flawed those relationships were, they saw the pursuit of love as something they were very interested in, right? And so, again, make a long story lousy, I think the Thornhill things, the quality that I hear in those now, if you had played those for me when I was 15 or 20 years old, I wouldn't have thought this at all. But now I think that's romantic music. That's World War II music. That's people who are longing for a simple way of life and be with someone they love and enjoy romance, and there's a certain innocence to it. And then there's this level of musical sophistication also, right? And so I think, well, jazz guys today have taken on this attitude like, well, I don't do sappy stuff. I don't do cheeseball stuff. I don't do goofy stuff. I only do what's hip and cool. But I think those guys back then understood that there was a way that you could be romantic and maybe even borderline innocent while you were still hip and cool. You know, I mean, I think Duke was like that. When you look at Duke's approach to clothing, women, any of that stuff, right? Miles in the '50s certainly was like that, right? So I think that those qualities that you hear are there, and I think I don't know if I would say they were by design, but they were certainly present there for a reason, you know. and I don't think they thought of it as cheesy. I think they thought of it as romance and a way to appeal to people, but not in a crass commercial way or a cynical way of, well, let's give them some cheesy stuff that they'll like. I think it was more like an honest mixing of music that was romantic and about love in some ways, with these higher level ideas of musical expression mixed in.
Mm,
So, I
great.
mean, obviously, I can't speak to how every one of those individuals thought about it, but I think that's in there. And in some ways, I guess I look at it like it's a little unfortunate now that people don't think, at least most of the people I come across, don't think that their music needs to communicate any kind of love for someone or any kind of genuine concern for other people. That it's all about just being as hip and cool as they can be. And I mean, I don't want to play stuff that has none of that in it, but I think there was a balance in that music somehow. you
Yeah.
know. And even in the Miles and Gill thing, I think there was a certain, hey man, when you listen to My Ship, like, you know, the sheet that Gil did for My Ship has the lyrics at the top,
Yeah.
and Miles was obviously thinking of those lyrics, and those are romantic lyrics. That tune is a beautiful romantic tune, but he doesn't play it like, well, here's a cheesy tune that I'll try to hip up for you. It's not like that at all.
Yeah.
So I think what you're hearing there in the Thornhill things, I mean, it's not as sophisticated as some of the later Gil things, but I think it's that same combination of the sophisticated sound and counterpoint and tone colors mixed with some romantic, danceable music.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. Good answer. It's great to think about that context within the time too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. All right.